Welcome everyone to our CG seminar number 155, and in the webinar format, I think around about number 40. We have with us today Kiev Ariza, whom I'll introduce in a moment. He's going to talk about neoliberalism and for-profit universities, the case of Laureate International. And Laureate is the subject of quite a lot of interest among researchers. There's been a number of studies which have touched on it, but I think Kiev is going to take us further and deeper into Laureate than most others have taken us today. Kiev is a lecturer in emerging markets at Coventry in the UK, Coventry Business School, University of Coventry, and his research is focused on this area, on neoliberalism at the global higher education level. So he's looking at all the related issues, the massification, privatization, commodification, marketization. But the fortunate thing about these well-traveled topics is that there's always something new to say. When you get into a substantial case study like this, it really goes to the heart of many fundamental issues in the sector. Now, before I bring Kiev in, I'm going to go through the webinar protocols, which you will be familiar with. In many cases, you will have heard this all before, but don't forget that the webinar is being recorded, that your words of wisdom and your chat will be posted within the next 48 hours or so. Please remember to keep yourself muted during the webinar unless you've been asked to speak or ask a question. There's no need to have your video on during the webinar, but please put it on when you're asking a question. It makes it all more personal for everyone. We recommend using the speaker view so you can more clearly see who is talking. So use that option in Zoom. To raise a question, use the chat function. We think it's a good idea if you can come in fairly early in this process, because you're more likely to get your question asked and answered during the session. The questions tend to rush in the last 10 minutes and people miss out at that point. So use the chat, write your question into the chat. When we reach the end of Kiev's substantive presentation, I'll then move to the Q&A session, and I'll give you a warning if your question is going to come up or when it comes up. When you're invited to ask a question, please unmute yourself, switch on your video, and state your name and where you are from. Everyone forgets that last instruction. State your name and where you are from. I think we can move into the substantive session now. So very happy to bring Kiev Ariza to the microphone at this point.
Thank you so much for the kind presentation, Simon, and thank you for all the audience that you're giving me the opportunity to share something that I'm passionate about, that we've talked about the global trends in higher education, and more specifically looking at for-profit higher education institutions, which they had been some matters of controversy all around the higher education sector. But as we will be developing some ideas about it, this case study, I'm hoping that it will be a matter of your interest by not only focusing on the UK, but extensively on other regions of the world where for-profit universities have different variation or varieties of impact. And so we'll talk about that. So thank you so much for the opportunity to share my presentation. I'm hoping that everybody is able to see the screen. So without any further ado, I will be heading start. So essentially, the case was about a for-profit multinational located in the US. So that's where they started, and they're still there. It's called Laureate Education, but normally or commercially, it's mostly known as Laureate International Universities. So maybe in a couple of countries from where you are at the moment, you might have had encounters with them, not as Laureate University, but rather as a group of independent, namely branded universities or independent ones, that they are interconnected in some way. So they consolidate their financial revenues and they move that over from those countries of origin, and they'll take it into the US as a consolidating profits, as this is a public company. So I wanted to start by giving you a little bit of so where I come from and the rationale for this presentation. So essentially, I started by the end of 2014, and fast forward until now, I am having the opportunity to present the findings of this single qualitative case study about Laureate Education. So I will walk you through about some of the rationales for the project, why did I choose a Laureate, and more importantly, something that it has been quite extensively debated across the scholars, not only in the UK, but on the rest of the world, about neoliberalism. So where are we in terms of global higher education, and how trends in global higher education, existing and predicted ones, have been influenced by this neoliberal state of mind and political, let's say, a political state, which has been influencing not only higher education, but again, the rest of the industries that might be related to that. So essentially, the goal was, from the very beginning, I found some existing gaps, not only in literature, but also empirical ones in terms of the number of for-profit case studies and the analysis of market-based strategies that were taking place not only not only at the private for-profit sector, but also at the public stage. So public universities being forced and drawn into this neoliberal idea or state of political or public policies by which they are both directly and indirectly affected. So essentially, my objectives were to identify the implications of neoliberalism in higher education by describing in a single case study about Laureate Education, about this global network structure, arrangement and operations in different national and global markets. Also, I was keen to understand and explore the meaning of social responsibility and profitability in higher education. So that duality in terms of seeking for profits and sustainability at the same time, which is still, I think it remains a pending issue for several universities. And so I wanted to find out more about what did that mean for the for-profit university in particular, and also ultimately to understand and to analyze the role of the state and how for-profit universities engage in governments and higher education systems. So I extended the literature review looking at neoliberalism as my core theoretical framework. So instead of looking at institutional theory on some other possibilities, I choose to have a theoretical framework of neoliberalism and how those neoliberal ideas and public policies as a package, they are interrelated or interconnected and affect the global trends in higher education. So specifically, which global trends I was talking about at the beginning? We said commodification, massification, privatization, internationalization, and another one that it's now more than ever quite relevant. It is not stated there, but it's about the dissociation or unbundling of higher education, which is extremely connected with what is happening in the online scenario about the provision of higher education through distance learning, and how is that affected, also how is that transferred to the internationalization in-house, the overall student experience as well. So in terms of methodological issues, I won't extend that much in that because I believe the richness of the value of the presentation lies a little more in depth on explaining to you what happened in terms of the data collection and where did that come from and how did I make sense of that, and eventually the conclusions that I could find and draw up, which are obviously limited to the for-profit arena, but with the potential to be transferred or even make sense of the similarities that might be happening in the for-profit industry, and how does that relate to the public universities and the challenges that are embedded specifically in such institutions as well. So essentially, the findings were, so I I came across the 4 key themes out of the data analysis. So essentially, there was strategic flexibility and operational efficiency, the public good and social responsibility and sustainability, the legitimacy and the profit motive in higher education, and the role of the state and the for-profit university. So those were the 4 key thematic themes that I came across after the data analysis. Again, as I said, a qualitative case study looking at a single company, but with a multiple units of analysis on the theoretical framework which neoliberalism provided. Okay, so I'm moving forward now. So I think part of the presentation, this is a consolidation. So if you would read this, this took nearly 4 years, but essentially it's rather interesting just to look at it and reflect it upon what happened. So these were pretty much the research questions that I came across. Obviously, it took years to refine them and make sense of what was going to happen, and so I proceeded to tackle each of the research question and make a definition of each of the corresponding, linked it with the themes that emerge out of the data analysis, and put it in the dissertation as one specific chapter. So as you can see, I'm not going to read it all because maybe by this time you have already read it, but I came across as well with theme definitions. So those were mine, and how did I understand each of the themes. So I provided a definition of each of them. So what, for example, I think one of the most relevant about the legitimacy in higher education systems. So about structural mechanisms and strategies implemented by universities to justify the intervention in higher education systems. So I was able to explore those narratives through qualitative semi-structured interviews. So I was able to find out and explore in depth about those notions of sustainability, legitimacy, and ultimately how Laureate was supposed to be interacting with the state in multiple or different higher education systems according to where they were located at that time, because I need to say that the data collection on this project ended up by the end of 2018. So many things has happened until now. So we'll provide with a little bit of update about what Laureate has happened up to this moment in time. But essentially, as a theoretical framework, I'm not going to expend so much time on this, but obviously I was looking at how universities were treated as institutions, so being completely public or private. So I found that there was no, from the extensive literature review conducted and looking at various scholars' contributions, I found out the notions of the autonomy of the state were highlighted as an explanation on how to conduct societies governed through institutions, discourses, norms, identities. As you see somebody familiar there cited about that in either case for public and for private universities, or even at a wide range or any level of prestige, revenues are important, particularly for elite institutions. But on my personal opinion, I would add that any university will do so if provided with the opportunity to do what? Obviously, to take care of the revenues and sources of, let's say, profitability, or even how is that connected to sustainability, the notion of sustainability. Okay, so moving on. I also had the opportunity to tackle about academic capitalism, which I did not extend so much in that, because rather I was not looking on a pedagogical point of view, but rather some managerial focus. So that being said, I came across with a number of definitions of academic capitalism and how neoliberal practice are inflicted, or the notion of neoliberalism and its consequences into the practice of either teaching or research practice, which I do realize that it's much more focused, and it has a strong leverage in or relevance in Europe higher education systems, but rather in, for example, Latin America and South America, which the company operated at that point in time when the data was collected. So you'll see there are strong differences in terms of how relevant a for-profit university might be, depending on the higher education system which they are interacting. So regardless of their profitable structure, regardless of the teaching and research, even more by the possibility that they are interconnected because they depend upon only one single multinational company. So I also had the possibility to reflect on the reproduction of private corporation performance in the public university, which it ended up, according to some literature, as a response for the new global power dynamics and inequalities in the context of the great global economic competition, with a potential increase in social stratification in consequence. And there are many things pending to say in terms of the reproduction of social inequalities, which I know some of you colleagues maybe on the audience might have a little more to say about the contributions or how universities or certain global higher education systems are reproducing social inequalities, but that was not entirely my focus. So I was much more into looking at looking at the operational efficiency and some strategic management techniques which Laureate as a global multinational was implementing throughout the entire global network, and again, looking at sustainability and about the profit motive and the role of the state in the end. So having said that, I think there were I was also inspired about neoliberalism as a discourse, and also the notion of austerity, which is again, I think that Dr. Blythe is rather good in saying that austerity understood as a form of voluntary deflation, in which the economy adjusts through reduction of wages, prices, and public spending to restore competitiveness. So I found out, and I think I agree with him, to the extent into which if you're applying austerity in certain countries, then you're not able to reproduce that to the same level. So whenever austerity measures are put in place by shrinking the state, that where individualism and this rhetoric about neoliberalism in academia, I think, surges. And it's not that we voluntarily embrace such narratives, but they are already there. And we have seen some empirical evidence on that, and even on news and on the media, and some other scholars which have criticized pretty much about how neoliberalism and the possibility to engage in certain global higher education system are strongly linked and encouraged, or are framework under a narrative of what deregulation and privatization and this notion of this entrepreneurial state in which they're just unleashing the opportunity to make profits out of the provision of a certain value, which is it has been themed as a public good, but it's maybe not entirely true anymore. So just as a wrapping up a little bit, and I think I will speed up in order to make sure that everybody has the opportunity maybe to come up with some questions. So I was obviously looking at the evolution of neoliberal thought. So I think this contribution by King Birch, I think on 2018, I think it pretty much consolidates and answers certain questions about why neoliberalism has been amongst us for for such a long period of time, and what is the expectation about it. So I'm not, without making any theoretical or claims about it, I think it pretty much provides an overview about how relevant is neoliberalism when analyzing higher education. So I wanted to link this, some economic thought and that evolution um, into the operation of for-profit institutions, more specifically looking at this single case study about Laureate Education. So as you can see, on a methodological note, this was something that I'm truly grateful for. The insights and contributions for both of my during my tenure as a doctoral researcher. So I had Dr. Simon Molan and Professor Bill Cook, and also I had some really good insights from Dr. Albert Mills and Daniel Muzio. So all those, I'm pretty grateful because we had, really good discussions about what would be the best approach, to tackle this qualitative research. So I came to find out, I follow what Berkovich said in 2017 about this qualitative positivist groundedness. So a certain or a huge degree of deductive reasoning, given by extensive literature reading about the phenomenon and before data collection takes place. So I remember becoming an expert and then drawing that into the field and actually giving the possibility through this, through the documents and the qualitative interviews that I conducted. So being able to be up to the game and without doing any participatory action research, just to make sure that we collected enough evidence and in a truly informative way, it was not entirely unidirectional, but just bidirectional. Okay, so the rationale for selecting Laureate, I believe one of the rationales for doing that was the fact that I evaluated, several international networks around the world, and maybe you might be aware of some of them, specifically Croton and Serra Educacional, which are those are from Brazil, but they are major ones, but just circumscribed to Brazil in itself. We do have a Polo Education Group, which pretty much back in 2017 radically changed its approach, and some private equity investors took over from that, as you might already know maybe. And then I looked at Navitas, which is an Australian-based multinational as well, and Kaplan Higher Education, which is from Graham Holdings. But as you can see, I was attracted by the fact that Laureate provided a really, a rich and multifaceted environment in which, as its name beholds, they were operating specifically in several regions around the world, being Brazil, Mexico, Spain, Chile, some Central America and US campus. So as you can see, this is just to provide an in-depth picture about how did I come up with an analysis of the organizational structure, and then moving on to select my my version of the embedded unit of analysis. So the original approach was to look at the headquarters based in the U.S. and then moving on to the regional office from where Latin American region was controlled and administered, which was in Miami in the U.S. as well, and eventually looking at Mexico as the last unit of analysis because of the prominence and how significant is the Mexican higher education market for Laureate or even for the private for-profit universities. But again, there were some stumps along the way. There were some obstacles, some even rejections from the headquarters in getting access. So as you know, the notion of resilience was something that it pretty much came to me live. So long story short, what I needed to do is just to refocus and establish a new approach, which I don't regret it because it provided me the possibility to do a richer and more more, let's say, wider evidence and contrasting what was happening with Laureate, not in terms of how the corporate multinational was looking or embracing the notion of neoliberalism and the managerial side of things, but I had the opportunity to talk with many people involved in Laureate and some other key stakeholders in the global higher education industry to talk and to expand further of what was going on with Laureate and for-profit industry overall. So I ended up with four units of analysis. So I kept Mexico City because of the convenience and purposive sampling that I conducted. I did the Laureate online partnerships, which were, because up to this moment in time, they have already left in the UK. So that was pretty much, and they were involved with the University of Liverpool and Roehampton on the provision of online degrees. And I also focused on EMEA, which is South Africa and Australia. So those were the countries that I'd had access to. And last but not least, the Andean and Iberian, which we're looking at Chile and Spain's Spanish market. So out of the semi-structured interviews, I should say that, so the evidence that I collected, they came across were out of two, there were two elements considered for me. So one of them was to having semi-structured open-ended interviews. So I ended up collecting 35 interviews. Maybe this is a little bit small, but if you can take a look at there, you will see the Laureate. So I looked at all those 4 units of analysis. On top of that, I was able actually to interview some other key stakeholders, which I consider they were quite relevant just to ensure validity and reliability and maybe coming across with the themes that emerge out of the data once I proceeded with the coding, which I'm going to share right now. I'm not going to spend so much on this because I'm mindful about the time. Following Noel 2017, so I came across, with all thematic analysis on the 6 phases that I needed to report. So there were some really good, quotes. Again, I might not be able to go through all of them, but as you can see, there were rich evidence, empirical contributions, and there were some interesting facts. Some of them, as you might know, as I translated some of the transcripts because the interviews I conducted were in Spanish, so I needed to translate and ensure reliability and not to be losing any meaning out of the data collected, which is something that I try to ensure to the extent possible. So the theme number 1, they pretty much drawn into so there were tensions between academic and managerial operations, the notion of competition and collaboration. There were some other remarks about the identity of Laureate and more specifically about the strategic partnerships, the operating segments. So as you can see, I drawn upon like two different iterations out of the data. So there were initial coding, and then I did some second phase coding for ultimately reaching up to the stage when I found out about the themes. So as you will see right here, there were a number of quotes, which again, I think there were some relevant quoting, for example, by forming a public benefit corporation, it's an interesting thing. And a public benefit corporation being something in the US that it started in Delaware and some other US states, by which companies which are explicitly for profit are tending to look and changing their legal status just as a justification that they are explicitly looking not only for profits, but at the same time, corporate social responsibility and sustainability at the same time. So it was rather interesting to explore what the interviewees had to say about whether or not that notion of being a public benefit corporation, what exactly did that mean? Because essentially Laureate changed its legal status along the way to become one of them. Okay, so yeah, so again, the thing number two, so I structure the themes all around exactly the same time. And I think what I would say, maybe I will just speed a little bit because they were, you know, the structure is pretty much the same about the whole four themes. So maybe drawn about, I think I would say a couple of key ideas which I would like to share with all of you. So there were some distinct organizational structures and strategies found in for-profit universities associated to profit maximization and scalable efficiencies achieved through shared resources and strategic flexibility. So again, the notion of customization in curriculum design and academic offerings of Laureate, it actually goes in line with Collini. Stefan Collini said in 2017, in that we might be witnessing the shift, and I'm quoting, the shift from the university as shaped by the social democratic era to the university as a reflecting the era of the politics of market individualism. Also, we could be concluded that strategic flexibility implemented by for-profit universities and the operational efficiency are linked to the implementation of metrics and standards to increase student enrollment, and which are consistent to the massification trend in higher education and the obsessive pursuit for profits by universities like Laureate. As Macmillan, Dr. Macmillan would put it, so the structure of colleagues as a profit-generating business fetishizes efficiencies. That's some of the conclusions. In terms of the here for good, social responsibility and sustainability in higher education, I found it quite relevant, particularly for the for-profit university and its ultimate search for legitimacy. So the strategic approach in the implementation of the Here for Good slogan. So I also found some good narratives related to the Here for Good slogan, which is, let's say, the sustainability umbrella branded all across the entire Laureate educational network. So how that notion in sustainability is pursued by Laureate, it pretty much I found that it reflected and it made sense, you know, contrasted with the literature existing about education for sustainable development, which has become, and I'm quoting, an established concept that fundamentally reinterprets the goals and methods and content of education. I found there were four essential sources of institutional legitimacy for the for-profit university. So I encompassed the four of them in success, distinctiveness and differentiation, third-party accreditation and assessments, being one of good example, the one that I said on the B Corporation and the Here for Good narrative, and the internationalization, which all of them were implemented by Laureate, and also the data revealed about the profit motive, which is inherently found in the for-profit and is often behaviorally mirrored by the public university. And this is something that I found it also quite controversial. There were some there were some respondents and some conversations out of the interviews that they were quite interested in finding out more and making sense whether the lines that once separated the operation of the public university and the private university are no longer clear enough. So that also was something that led me to further my approach and gave me some sense of recommendations for further from further studies. So from this perspective, the for-profit university radically reinforcing the dark side of neoliberalism ideology, which originally it was inflicted by the state and nobody else, I would say. So it started from the state and then it transferred on an individual basis. And we do have some examples on that narrative and that, let's say, state of mind imposed by the state and reproduced on the entrepreneurial self and linked to the individualism in the end. Another thing is what I found, what I made as a conclusion once after I made sense of all of the data collected and the analysis conducted. It was that the for-profit university was not only an ideological driver for the reproduction of neoliberalism in higher education, but it was also arguably, and this is something controversial as well, the starting point of the construction or the building up of a higher education systems by the state, which also affects organizational structures found in the public university, because some of the public universities, as you might know, the degree of autonomy, it's not entirely clear, and it sometimes is challenged depending on the higher education system that we refer to. So depending on that level of freedom, it's how clear this sense of autonomy and how the public university could behave and could operate. So last but not least, as I said from the very beginning, there was also, you know, the discovery or the confirmation of one surging trend. And back then in 2008, and I think it's been quite reinforced right now, about the unbundling of higher education. So picking off all the pieces or the distribution of the operation of higher education and disassembling or dismantling the public and the private university into several pieces according to economic austerity measures, or even the neoliberal era in which we are embedded as individual citizens. Because as one, just as a concluding remark, I would conclude my presentation by saying that this study showed some evidence that the reproduction of neoliberalism ideology through the market intervention of private universities in higher education, although I found that great ideological struggle comes from multiple academic and social spheres in accepting the participation of for-profit universities, which is highly controversial. It needs to be further discussion about the academic role and the social contributions from for-profit universities in certain countries where educational opportunities provided by the state might be both insufficient and historically limited to social elites. So thank you so much for the presentation. I'll just open to questioning, and thank you Simon.
And thank you, Kiev. That took us a long way into your study and opened up, Laureate, I think, for everyone in a very useful way. We've got a lot of questions. I'll ask you one briefly first, and then our first questioner after that will be Christina Cavallo. So my question is this: I mean, the debate about neoliberalism and the public versus market approach and so on, or the public and market approach as it is in some countries, I mean, that's been going on probably for 30 years. It's been in a lot of ways the primary discussion, and in some respects, it's been the primary agenda for governments too. When they've been looking at reform and the possibility of reform, they've tended to reach into the neoliberal bag of tricks, you know, the sort of notions and ideas that have come up through that mode of government as a way of achieving change or expanding systems, providing for massification and so on. Things seem to have changed. I mean, in the last 3 or 4 years, you could say that the debate about populism, national identity, in some ways has started to subsume or overcome economic rationality and prosperity as primary concerns of government. So you've got cases like Brexit where governments make irrational decisions in economic terms, but they're rational according to a political logic of government survival, but also political logic of identity, primary national purpose, if you like. The other development, of course, is the pandemic. Now, the pandemic has sorted out the market approach to some extent. It's made it look less sustainable in the short term. The systems which are depending on market approaches are struggling. The systems where government provides without question and you know, acts as a sort of not only as a point of last resort, but is the normal provider and financer of higher education. Those systems have been sustained so far in the pandemic. I mean, they may become impossible to sustain financially if the economic recession is bad enough and goes on for long enough. But I mean, what's your sense of this? I mean, do you think the debate has shifted? Are the private solutions less attractive, or is debundling more or less likely to occur because of the pandemic period?
Thank you so much for the question. I would say I will put two examples on that. I would say in the reproduction of of the public university linked to the let's say the intellectual and the managerial domination of the state. I would say it pretty much is. It might not be entirely sustainable under this global health crisis, but we do have examples such as in Chile with higher education reform. It's about to overtake or let's say reshape the higher education system, which has been strongly linked first in neoliberalism, but now it looks like they are doing a U-turn, and then it's resuming up the role of the state as a highly relevant. And we see, but having said that, you talked about reform. So I see there are markets in which the level of maturity, for example, in the UK on certain European markets, are not entirely open to new or emerging contributions or new institutions such as Laureate, by which you will have a for-profit institution, sometimes not entirely looking at with the managerial governance deviated from the higher education, and maybe looking explicitly of getting profits out of the convenient system and reforms or the current status of the global higher education system. So, for example, we have seen in the UK a really good push towards opening up the market and increasing. I think I see a conflict between expanding the global markets for the sake of improving access, so that's massification. But on the other hand, I see a conflict from certain states that they are not able to satisfy the needs of the market, so they are inherently leaving people behind. So that's where I see in certain markets, specifically in developing economies, where for-profit institutions or even some universities might have the possibility to enhance and to collaborate with the state in the provision of a higher education service, which in no other way it would be possible because of economic crisis.
Mm. Thanks, Kiev. Can we bring in at this point Christina Cavallo?
Hello, everybody. Thank you so much, Professor Simon Marston, for this opportunity. Congratulations and thank you so much, Dr. Kiev, for your wonderful presentation and research. We have met some years ago at UCL in CGHE seminar, and I am professor at University of Brasilia in Brazil. My research focuses on equity of access and financing in Brazilian higher education. And the private sector has 75% of enrollments in Brazil, while for-profit sector has 43% of private enrollments. So the Laureate International occupies the 4th position in estimated net revenues and enrollments in Brazil. So the Laureate is very important for us in the size and the market share. And it's possible to observe the capital concentration and financialization of Laureate Group in the 4th case studies. You explain in the end of your presentation, but what's the role of states in this case? We can explain more. And last question, in your vision, what are Laureate's market strategies to deal with pandemic? Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Christina. Yes, I have had the opportunity and the pleasure to meet you before. Thank you for attending. Thank you for asking the question. I promise I will give an update real time about what Laureate is happening. So it's been from when I finished my study up until now, there has been a decrease and a severe exit from Laureate for different markets. They started leaving the UK and Europe overall, and in Brazil they just closed, a new cell with Ser Educacional, which is another group that you might be already heard about it. So they have been exiting certain markets, for example, Brazil, and in Chile they're already gone as well. So they have been divesting so much. So I would say their approach and their strategic approach from the last 2 years until now, it pretty much goes in line with the criticism about having private equity funds behind higher education institutions. So the moment that they faced huge challenges in terms of regulatory measures or even economic crisis, such as the one that it's linked right now to this global health crisis as well, the moment that they are on the line on that, they might be exiting and shifting their operations to some other markets, or even leaving higher education behind and entering in some different industries. So that's pretty much the criticism I think that lays, and sadly for the case of the for-profit narrative and the opportunity, I think it pretty much damages the reputation overall, which is something that it has been challenged over time.
Thanks, Kiev. I think a couple more questions are going to raise those issues too. Clear calendar. You'll need to turn on, that's it.
Yeah. Following on from Christina's point, we know in Brazil that the market share is very high in terms of private provision generally and Laureate in particular. We also know that the role of private higher education in terms of the massification of higher education varies from one country to another, as does the proportion of students. What's not clear in the analysis that you presented to us is how those very substantial variations between countries has affected or is important for your findings, because you talk about Laureate in a sort of homogeneous way, but indeed the way presumably it operates in different countries is different. Similarly, the higher educational contexts are different. So how does that affect your overall findings and your overall understanding about Laureate and about private higher education? And do, government attitudes and government relationships between Laureate and mainstream higher education, do they vary from one country to another? In other words, more nuances to your analysis.
Thank you, Claire. Yeah, I think to answer your question, it would be a matter of looking at the role of the state in the higher education and how that, how my findings fit into the narrative of the role of the state and how the for-profit university configures itself and relates into that and contributes into the global higher education systems. So I did have the opportunity to elicit and to make some, concluding remarks on that. By looking at how the state, which were the key roles of the state in the configuration and the relationship between for-profit universities and institutions. So yeah, indeed, my findings or my conclusions were strongly, I would say, affected by those disparities, regardless of talking about the one single multinational. It was not entirely homogeneous, and that is something that was a bit a source of a conflict, because when drawing my conclusions, it was not entirely clear or valid to make a claim that all for-profit universities were doing badly or they were, doing wrong, So essentially, by looking at the 4 units of analysis that I came across, it provided me with a wide range of possibilities to look at. So it was not entirely the same how Laureate was conducting their operations and relating into the state and making contributions in the higher education system in Mexico, from whereas it was happening, for example, in Europe when they were operating in France or in the UK, or even when they're operating in Australia as well. So indeed, I mean, I will be more than happy, maybe because of the time constraint that we have now, to further the conversation and maybe explain a little more in detail about what were those variations and how did I find out and put them there as the concluding remarks.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks both. Eduardo Ramos, please.
Hello, sorry, I'm just trying to start my camera here.
Good, we have you.
Hi.
Excellent.
Thanks very much, Kiev, for a thought-provoking presentation. My name is Eduardo. I work as Head of Transnational Education for Universities UK International. My question relates to the geographical spread of Laureate's activities. I was wondering why there is such a strong emphasis in Latin America and Iberia. I'm especially intrigued because UK transnational education operations tend to find incredible barriers to enter precisely those markets. They have expanded phenomenally in Asia, across the Middle East, and in Africa, but they haven't really entered Latin America in the same way. So that was my first question. And then if I may ask, have a second question. It would be about the program portfolio. So I was wondering about the programs that they teach. Do they teach also, financially resource-intensive subjects such as medicine and the like? Because this is another of the barriers that UK providers find when they develop transnational education overseas. They normally tend to enter subjects that are easier to teach to an overseas audience. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Eduardo, for your question. I'm glad that you asked. The rationale for global higher education and looking at emerging markets, or specifically Latin America, and the possibility to enter that, I think it has been twofold. I think it has been the opportunity given by this openness and approach of the regulatory measures that some countries, specifically Mexico, Chile, Brazil, they have undertaken over the years. Tackling the second question, they do have in their portfolio the operation of certain degrees that will be themed as let's say lab intensive ones. And they also undertake several accreditation measures. I would say they will do all things necessary to ensure the operation is in a streamlined fashion and ensuring that it's profitable and they would say sustainable as well, but that's again something controversial. But I found that there were some strategic flexibility for the company to operate in multiple markets at the same time. So answering your question in shortly, the fact that they have been able to enter the markets, it has been through mergers and acquisition to existing universities and brands that in some contexts that have been with certain, let's say, tradition. So they were able to enter the market quite fast, and that actually happened in the case of Mexico. That's an example from the beginning in the year 2000. So it was not entirely just Mexico, but some other markets. But we could talk about further on as well. I don't want to go over the time. I'm mindful about it.
Thank you for your courtesy, Kiev. We do have a lot of questions and we're not going to get through them all, but we'll have a go at that. Next question is from Phil Altbach.
Thank you very much. I'm Philip Altbach at the Center for International Higher Education at Boston College in the United States. I had a couple of comments, which hopefully you can reflect on. They're not exactly questions. One is, as you already mentioned, Laureate is in the process of leaving Chile entirely, And one wonders exactly why. And I've asked some Chilean colleagues and they didn't exactly know. Some of your data pointed out that some of your respondents said, well, we're here to stay. That's certainly not the case. Absolutely not the case. So people were not telling you the truth. My second point is that, and Simon mentioned this also, that the position of governments seem to change about for-profit higher education. And that may, and you mentioned this a little bit, that may be why the laureate is leaving Chile, because of this new education reform, the direction of which isn't clear at this point in time. So it's a changing sort of global environment for regulation and permission and so on. And this may upend the for-profit industry in general. And my final point, and I'd be interested to hear your reflections on it since you've been doing research on the topic, I think we're seeing a kind of a sea change in this, in this industry. Kaplan, as you know, has sold itself to Purdue University, quite controversially in the United States, and it will be interesting to see how that works. So some of the big players are getting out of the industry, selling, making changes in how they do business, linking up with legitimate, real universities, and so on. So I think we're in a period of significant change. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Dr. Albert. It is my pleasure, to comment on your contributions. So first thing I would say, it's the degree of of massive change that global higher education systems are experimenting now. It has been exacerbated by by economic crisis and global pandemic at the same time. So needless to say, markets such as large markets such as the US, for example, or even Australia, they have been undergoing a massive change in terms of the approach and the openness for the for-profit industry. Laureate being the only one that has been granted a private university in Australia for several years now, and in the US it has been challenged. We need to remind people from 2012 that the US Senate report that it was quite highly questioning and challenging the practice of marketing and recruitment, which were deceitful, and so drawing on that, I would say the role of the state, it has changed, and something that I would say amongst the findings that I had, it was one of the roles of the state, it was as an investor. And I know that might be controversial to configure the role of the state as an investor or as an ally for the private for-profit industry. But it in some ways, we have been witnessing certain things. And I think building on what you said on Purdue University, taking for, I think it was from $1. So they owned Kaplan, and they for their online degrees provision. I think that might be one of the preliminary examples. So we'll see what happens, but it is this pressure for keeping financially healthy higher education institutions, which is in some way, it's putting pressure even on all traditional public universities. And something that I did not mention is that even in the UK, we have the examples of public universities even going to the stock markets and issuing bonds, so issuing debt in order to fund and get extra funding for multiple types of purposes. So I see a convergence, and I see some sort of not an intellectual, but much more a pragmatic integration of the public and the private. That's why I said that the lines that once differentiated those institutions in terms of their organizational structure and priorities in terms of funding, they are quite not clear at the moment.
Thanks, Kevin. Thanks, Phil. I think we've got time for two more. Our next question is from David Law. David and Kiev, if you could be quite succinct in handling this Q&A, we could bring in one more after you, which I hope to be able to do. David.
Thank you, Simon. My name is David Law. I'm Academic Director, Global Partnerships at Kiev University. My question is about Laureate and China. Laureate's a capitalist company. It goes where return on investment is high. China has had a rapidly expanding economy, huge HE system. We know that Laureate invested in the Xianjiang collaboration with Liverpool University in Suzhou. What else do we know about it, please?
Well, long story short, they were doing a third-party, ownership of those institutions, something quite similar that they undertook in the Emirates as well. So it's pretty much quite similar the way. So it's an indirect ownership or like an outsource, let's say, operations that they undertake, and they were quite profitable at the same time, but it's under review. I will be happy to expand later on, but I think Simon asks just to be.
Thank you.
Yep.
Very kind of you both. Maria Ivancheva has the last question. Hello, Maria.
Hi, how are you? Thanks for the seminar, the webinar. I'm struggling how to formulate a question because I have quite a few questions in mind, and I have done a lot of research on OPMs myself. And I'm having the feeling that we're all scratching the surface, but like you said something in the beginning, Kiev, about like how neoliberal thought helped you see OPMs or Laureate's operation better. And I'm really wondering, can you elaborate a bit more on that? Because from what I understand, I think Simon said something along those lines as well. We're now already kind of shifting from outside, the kind of new public management operative system of public higher education, and we're now probably entering something closer to what Shoshana Zuboff has called surveillance capitalism, with a lot of big data buying and selling, with a very clear line management of big companies through state, political kind of crony capitalist alliances. And I think the old concepts of the state against the market and so forth that we've been operating probably for a wrong reason and for a long reason are already becoming a bit derelict. So I'm wondering, how do you relate to that? And where do you stand now, even more so thinking from the time of the pandemic, on where this scenario is developing of OPMs?
Thank you for that. I mean, in terms of the OPMs, I think that has to do with the with the unbundling of higher education, and that was something that I talked about. But yes, I absolutely agree about the further or the future avenues for research and the possibilities that this topic might entail. For example, you mentioned about surveillance capitalism, which is something that I think it's strongly ambitioned as the immediate future. And given the fact that even I think another avenue for exploration might be, again, the role of the state as, within the surveillance state and power and control, and how do we embrace such dynamics in the relationship. Another thing I would say on the political theory side of things, it would be about this resurgence of nationalism. So how that new global trend within political systems, led by populist, even leadership located in different markets, higher education markets. How is that affecting, the the provision, even the provision of higher education institutions, not only for the level of openness for profit or new players, but for old-fashioned and traditional universities, and how is that interconnected with this new post-COVID-19 reality. So thank you for that. I mean, I should say that my conclusions were drawn out of the picture of how for-profit universities such as Laureate was operating back then, which it might not be entirely the reality that we are looking at the moment. But I will be more than happy to further explore and keep the conversation going about, the political possibilities in even a post-neoliberal state, which I know there has been some also some contributions from scholars, which they open up the possibility to have a post-neoliberal state from this moment in time.
Well. Thank you very much, Kiev, for everything and that you've done today. I mean, your initial presentation and your intelligent and handling of all the questions. Lots more could have been asked and answered if we had more time. We stick to a 1-hour format, and we hope that that is good for our participant audience, knowing, that it's not going to go for too long and they can stay into the end. But sometimes we regret that when we get to this point and we have got many more things to say. But I think that the issues raised by Maria are quite fundamental, and the risk you take in doing research on current activity in higher education or any other sector is that things move quicker than research. The reality is always ahead of us, and we're struggling always to keep up with, especially to gain the overview we need on these trends. So thank you all for participating, and do tune in again on Thursday at 2:00 UK time, where we've got a different topic, but to me a very interesting one, the history of the university. It's great flowering in India, or we should really say the prototype or the pre-university higher education, the great Buddhist monasteries of India, which had such an enormous effect also on East Asia in bringing Buddhism to China, Korea and Japan. And the university or proto-university form in India is our topic, and we'll have Shailendra Raj Mehta, who is an expert on that topic and a very good presenter from India, to speak to us. So look forward to seeing you then. Take care in this very tempestuous time in UK higher education that we're all having, which we will talk about also in future. Take care, and we'll see you hopefully in 2 days' time. Thanks, Kiev.
Thank you, Simon, and thank you everybody for joining me and attending the session today. It's been my pleasure.
And thank you, Trevor.